Okay, hello everyone, good evening. Welcome to Coffee, Buses and Politics special edition discussing the results of the local elections happening a couple of days ago. So today we have a special guest on this Coffee, Buses and Politics podcast. So Martin, over to you to introduce yourself, tell us more about who you are and what is your connection to Cambridgeshire politics.
So Martin Curtis, I used to be a Conservative councillor and I was the leader of Cambridgeshire County Council. Confession here that although I would still describe myself as a Conservative, I'm not a Conservative Party member anymore. I resigned with Rwanda actually being the final straw. And you can see by my background, I'm also an ageing hippie.
Can I let's just get this out of the way. You also who succeeded you as being leader of the?
So I replaced Steve Count as leader, and my predecessor was a guy called Nick Clark, who some of you might remember as well.
So you're the person who gave us Steve Count, who's one of my best mates, obviously, on politics. But what I would say to you, and what I agree with you, is that Steve Count is one of the best councillors I know in terms of like somebody who's going to turn up at a meeting and be prepared and ask questions. Yeah. He's a brilliant guy, isn't he? And he can be really useful at meetings. Just that me and him fall out a bit on social media sometimes. So
well, I have a lot of time for Steve. I'm not sure. He did a great job as leader, but I would contend, because it was the reason I stood down as leader of the council, I would contend that a big part of that is the fact that the county council has a committee system. I cannot see how anybody sees a committee system as being the best system of governance for a county council, with the amount of money it spends and what it does. And I stood down as leader because I just couldn't see myself continuing under a committee system. And I personally believe that history has proven me right.
Well, maybe we should have a next Coffee, Buses and Politics on committee system versus cabinets and the advantages and disadvantages of those. But meanwhile, let's start with an easy question about the local elections. So obviously all of us have watched and have followed as the results came in over Thursday night, Friday, and some of them actually yesterday until quite late in the evening yesterday for the West Midlands mayoral results. What was the most surprising result for you? So let's start with Stephen. What shocked you the most seeing the results?
It's not really a shock because it was always going to be a tight contest, but I was convinced later in the campaign and during the voting as well that Anna Smith was going to win the Police and Crime Commissioner thing. I think the early voting was quite strong for her, and it came down to Cambridge and she just missed it at the end. So that's not really a shock, because I think if you'd asked us 3 weeks ago and when we did the Police and Crime Commissioner special, I wouldn't have necessarily predicted her, but I was increasingly confident and a bit disappointed that she lost. And the other one is there was also a town council election in Amesbury, and the town councillor got over 1,000 votes, an independent new council, which I think 1,000 pack votes in 1,100 votes in town council election is pretty incredible. But so for me, it was the Police and Crime Commissioner was the one that I was watching most closely, but it's probably the least interesting of all because it makes no difference at all, I don't think. But I kind of wanted Anna to win.
Well, we'll discuss in more detail kind of the results of the Police and Crime Commissioner elections and how the different districts compare as well in a minute. But meanwhile, Martin, what was the most shocking result for you on election night?
It depends what you mean by shocking. I don't think there's any surprises, particularly in Cambridgeshire. In reality, I think you could make a case to say that the extent of the Conservative demise in Peterborough was a bit of a shock, and certainly from somebody that wants conservatism to win, from that perspective, I think it's shocking. I don't want conservatism to win. Sorry, I want conservatism to succeed. Is the point I would make. Proper conservatism to succeed, not the brand we've got at the moment in Britain.
How about you, David? It can be an example from outside Cambridgeshire as well, if you want.
Well, I mean, I was really disappointed. I mean, I was expecting Count Binface to win as mayor, and bringing back CFAX was a policy that clearly appealed. Now, this might be a slightly. Actually, I'm not surprised. It's shocking, but not necessarily surprising. But turnout. I said it before, said it again. I don't like the position of PCC, but when you've got turnout for instance, in Cambridgeshire, average turnout was 25%, basically because there were also elections in Cambridge and Peterborough. Turnout in Huntingdonshire, I think, was 20.66. Fenland was 17%. So, when in an area a fifth of people are turning out to vote, that does have I think implications for democratic legitimacy. I think the one that slightly surprised me as well was Jamie Driscoll. I thought Jamie Driscoll was going to win, but didn't, and Labour got it. So yeah, I think those are the ones I'd go for. I mean, in around Cambridgeshire, I mean, I like Stephen, I thought that Anna was going to win, but that's because quite often when you're in a campaign, I was delivering leaflets for Anna and for Alex, but or at least I get a bit tunnel vision and assume, everything's great. Either I'll go the other way and go, everything is terrible and it's going to be a disaster.
Got a bit about that when we talk about the London Mayor's elections, David. I've still got a grudge against you, mate, but we'll talk about that later.
I've just noticed that if you average out the four of us, you've got two people with short hair.
Yeah.
But there's still a majority of people with beards on the program.
If we average out the four of us, you've got two people with hair.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Yeah, all right.
That Fenland turnout. Can we ask Martin, who's a prominent Fenland political figure? The Fenland turnout is disgraceful, though, isn't it? 17%.
Fenland always has a lower turnout than everyone else. It's not justification, but it is evidence of the poor politics in Fenland. The lack of opposition within Fenland just drives down any incentive for people to get out and vote. People just think that you create a ballot paper and whoever's on the ballot paper with Conservative against the name is going to win. That pretty much is the way it is. And part of the conversations I have with people is about how you can rejuvenate politics in Fenland, because I'd be blunt about it, I'm not a fan of Fenland District Council either. And the only way you're going to drive up the standards and drive up what people get from Fenland District Council is by better politics. But it is shocking. And I sort of agree with David about the PCCs. I see the role of PCCs, but within Cambridgeshire, why not give it to the mayor?
I agree as well.
Yeah, I do also agree there are too many layers of local government in general, and we had many discussions on this live stream about what could be replaced or merged within existing structures. Before I go into sharing some of my own reflections about local elections, just saying there are about 150 people watching live. So if you have questions or comments or your own favorite moments from the local elections results night or the days following the results night that you'd like to share, please do add them on the comments. We'll put some comments and questions on the screen.
It's nice to have an audience and not wearing their pajamas, isn't it, for a change as well? So hopefully,
yes, we'll be back
the first time ever. That's 161 fully clothed people. Probably.
Yeah, well, on Friday morning, we'll be back on Fridays at our usual 7 a.m., which is my favorite time before work starts. So that is the best time to discuss politics.
I want to know how Stephen can see what everybody is wearing.
So it's my account. That's the truth.
That is the Opposition Watch software. We don't have access to.
Alex, what was your biggest surprise?
Well, it's interesting what you said about I have some reflection on the PCC elections as well, because I think for those of us who were in verification in different parts, depending on where you were, you had a more positive view. So, for example, I was in St. Ives for the Huntingdonshire district verification, and I was doing the sampling as usually do, and I thought we're actually doing so much better than I expected here, and especially in areas where we haven't really done much campaigning, to be honest about it, so far. And I thought that would be good for Anna, because I thought the vote in the city and Peterborough would be strong. But then when I looked at the overall results, if you break them down, Cambridge City is actually the only district, well, it's city council, but the only district where there's actually a swing in the other way around. So everything, if you look at Phil Rogers' bar charts on Twitter, everywhere else is a swing from the Tories to Labour. And Anna needed about like what was it, over 5% swing to win the election. But in Cambridge City, in some of the wards, it's actually the other way around. And I think it's interesting to comment whether there's still a legacy of the congestion charge debate, or the Conservatives targeting some of those words, which is really the case in like areas like King's Hedges, for example, in Cambridge City, or what was it? But it's I think Cambridge overall is a good result, Cambridge City, as it usually is for Labour, but it could have been much better, I think, for this specific PCC vote, although in the city council they did quite well. The most surprising result for me was a Cambridge City one, actually, which was in Newnham, which is one of the target seats for the Green Party, where the Greens won an additional seat on the city council, on Cambridge City Council. So they came first, of course. But then it was the seat of the county council leader, Lucy Letzinga, who is
that's
also
shocking, personally.
Yeah.
I don't think it was a shock. I think that was probably expected for
Yeah.
people in Cambridge politics. But as a county councillor, I'm a big fan of Lucy. She's one of my favourite people, and I'm sure Martin would agree, having worked with her as well. So that's and that just shows you, isn't it? That shows you what a fragile game politics is, because you can be an excellent leader of the county council, and then you can be out on your arse a few weeks later if you're not careful.
But there's something else here as well, that if we all knew that was likely, Lucy also knew. And actually, you see what a lot of politicians do in those circumstances, which is, and the excuse Lucy could have made is, I'm busy with the county council, I haven't got time to do this, I'm not going to stand. And she could have
chicken run,
that. And she didn't. And I take my hat off to her for that.
Yeah, I agree. I think for me, the most surprising thing was the Lib Dems actually came third, because I did expect a Green win there, given the resources the Greens put into their target seat. But it was like Green, then Labour, and then, Lucy, then the Lib Dems. So it actually completely, the politics have changed a lot in there, from an almost 50% Lib Dem vote to an under 20% Lib Dem vote in that specific city council ward. So it is quite surprising in terms of how much has changed, with the Greens campaigning a lot and Labour being a bit more present as well, and how much this kind of doorstep activity and more resources put into what was a very safe Lib Dem area has changed it since 2015, really, has changed a lot. So that's what was interesting for me. But there are other interesting results in Cambridge City as well. I expected some of them to be closer. I actually did expect the Conservatives to win King's Hedges, but they didn't. Given how much resources was invested there, I really thought they would take another seat, because of course Conservatives have one councillor in Cambridge City Council, which is in King's Hedges, and I did think they would have a second one after how much work was being put there.
Knowing what I know about Cambridge and the people of Cambridge, and because I did the city deal, I got to know about the Cambridge economy and what those people, what makes people tick in Cambridge quite a lot. It doesn't surprise me, because I don't see anything on the Conservatives' national ticket that appeals to the general resident in Cambridge. That's the reality about it. And you look at the culture of Cambridge and and how it works. So it doesn't surprise me.
So Matt, my friend Matt Houghton has made that comment as well. How much of that swing was down to STZ? One surprise, looking at the results, there wasn't, people like Dave Bajan, who have been quite polarizing characters. And if you look on some of the online debates, Dave gets it in the neck all of the time and seen as, but he got a massive victory. But I guess where is he, Romsey? Is he Romsey?
The Romsey is the safest Labour seat in Cambridge City. Is Neil Shaler, who's county councillor there, has the biggest majority as a county councillor. It takes a lot more. I know people are saying it's possible. It takes a lot of campaign resource to actually win a seat like that. It's not just the social media argument. So I do think all the parties were quite active there, but it was not surprising for me that Labour held onto that seat, because it's the safest one. Maybe Petersfield and others, but Romsey has very strong Labour presence. And I think it's also the case that people vote. It depends how many people vote for the party as opposed to the person, or both. Because in some cases, people might be well, I don't really like particularly what, let's say, Dave Bajan said on the congestion charge, but I'm still a Labour supporter and I'll still vote for Labour. So I think it's very difficult to kind of estimate those kind of things. Whereas in other areas, it's much more based on a personal vote and more especially where independence, and this was Stephen can comment as well, where independence win is much more politics is much more personal. But I think it's really interesting, this question around how much was still the legacy of the sustainable travels on the congestion charge debate, because Phil Rogers actually put on Twitter this bar chart with the swing from the Tories to, well, from Labour to the Tories last time in the last city council elections as opposed to this year, and how much it has been reduced, because last year there was an almost 20% swing in Cherry Hinton, for example, where the Tories almost won the seat, and now there was still a swing to the Conservatives, but much more reduced. So, is it because some people thought, well, the congestion charge debate has ended now, like we focus on other issues? Perhaps the national brand and the national policies of the Conservative Party played more of a role in how people decide to vote, or was it something else? What do you think about that?
Can I just? I'm going to answer Matt's question directly and tell him what I think, and which is that nobody is making the positive case for STZ enough in Cambridge and Cambridge City and what it's about. And it's something that I watched this debate from the outside, and all I watched was the negative. And I hate the politics of no, and there's too much of it in this country at the moment. But nobody is making a positive case for STZ or whatever it is in Cambridge. And the reality is, the way we move around this country is going to change dramatically in the next 10 to 15 years. And unless you start to enable that change, Cambridge stays stuck as it is. And Cambridge is not a city that can afford to let that happen. That's the truth. And people need to start talking about it more and more and getting people to understand it. In America, they're designing cars that fold, so you can basically put them in a backpack.
Can I come in on the back of that? I disagree with Matt's thing about ULEZ seeming not to be a problem for Khan. Yeah. I think it was. I
think it was.
I think it was. I'm glad. I'm glad that ULEZ went through, not least because it means my young nephew is now in the ULEZ zone and wasn't before. I'm very keen on him being able to breathe slightly better air, or rather better air. But the point you're making, Martin, about no one making the positive case, I think is really important, because the other thing is in London, and I'm not hopefully not being too rampantly partisan here. Actually, one thing was Labour, I think, got a bit frit by that parliamentary by-election, which wasn't good. But you've got an awful lot of conspiracy theories going around about, people are going to be driving, people are going to be charged pay per mile and a whole lot of stuff, and then the 15-minute cities conspiracy theory and so on. And to deal with those, I think you do need to take those head on, and and we don't have that in Cambridge. Part of the reason for that is, like, when you want to call Cambridge, who do you call? Because you've got so many people responsible for it, which is a problem. And then I think the STZ was actually, I put my cards on the table. I think if I would have supported it probably, but the communications around it weren't great. No. The STZ sort of came to public attention when someone found it on sort of, page 172 of a board paper, I think.
And that's important, though, because it's about controlling narrative, isn't it? And the story was never about improved public transport. It was all about having to pay a congestion charge and a war on motorists. And because they didn't get ahead of the story and didn't get their story out first, it was blown from the beginning, I think. Because I always believe you have to get out there first and tell your story, and that could have changed everything. I think personally, but
it's also true that it's easy media. The no to congestion charging is really, really easy media with the way the media works. And so there's that as well. It makes it really, really easy to sell the negative message. But I don't think the positive message is out there. We've been talking about congestion charging in Cambridgeshire for about 10, 15 years. And what we've actually managed to do is absolutely nothing.
Were you in for the last lap of that as well? Was that before your time?
Yeah, I was. It was not long after I was appointed to cabinet. We went through the last round, and we went through an independent commission to look at it. and it was politically impossible then, but the agenda was very different. But the reality is, it's not that we haven't done congestion charging, but we've managed to do this instead. What we've done is absolutely nothing.
Yeah.
And so all that's happened is the issues around Cambridge, around getting around Cambridge, have just got worse.
And lost a load of time and a load of money is the other thing, isn't it? And a load of public well, which is even worse.
All the work we did for the city deal, it was all about getting in and out of Cambridge and the lack of orbital capacity around Cambridge. And everything we talked about, and the message we sent to government was really, really clear that unless we start to deliver and do something with this, then the economy of Cambridgeshire Cambridge will slow down. And the reality about that is, so I'm going on about this, but it's something I really care about. But the reality about the congestion, about that issue with Cambridge is, if things are not happening in Cambridge, okay, with the fantastic medical research and everything that's going on, one of two things will happen. Either it will move, the work that would have happened in Cambridge will move abroad. That's the best of the two scenarios. The second scenario is some of that fantastic medical research won't happen.
Oh.
Things have got to change around Cambridge, and unless somebody bites the bullet and starts selling that message, we just end up where we are.
I'll just take one more comment on this before maybe we can discuss a bit about the PCC elections and some of the results across our divisions. But yeah, I really agree with this about the messaging, saying like, well, ULEZ is about clean air. And I think the other thing that really helped the opposition to congestion charge proposals is the fact that it was the narrative was all about like, well, punishing people who can't afford to pay. And I think that's the main difference in London, is that like with this scheme is the scrappage scheme, and it actually incentivizes you to like, you know, get, although you can still be opposed to it, of course, but incentivize you and the local, well, whatever, like you're supported to get like a better car that is compliant. So it's not about like a kind of like a what they call a blanket charge on everyone else. And that really didn't help like the whole narrative about, you know, people who are in lower paid jobs having to pay £5 a day to go to work and so on. That is something that I think really, like from a just comms and narrative perspective, made it completely politically impossible, in my view, because you can't have you can't sell a progressive policy like whilst framing it in an unprogressive way, whereas the London one is a bit different, although it still has opposition, I think, in all different
Yeah.
I mean, there is an issue, you know, I mean, for instance, there's a comparison there with London where people massively overstated the number of cars. And they would, I think, sometimes were genuinely mistaken, sometimes were doing it deliberately.
Yeah,
the number of cars that would no longer
many people.
Would be ULEZ compliant.
Yeah.
But I think there is a real issue that when you're doing basically things for the environment, you do have to worry about where the costs of that fall. You know, it's all very well. I mean, I'll give the example that I always go back to, the electric cars. It looks, you know, we're going to be stopping the sale of new petrols and diesels. Electrics are okay; they're getting cheaper, but they're still considerably more expensive. But they're also, to a certain extent, premised on having your own space. Where you can charge them, and in my, I mean, I'm just a town councillor, but my ward covers the Oxmoor estate, where parking is already a complete nightmare. Where are people? You know, it's just that practical thing. Whereas, like, if you've got a drive, or even if you've got a dedicated parking space, but more generally, you know, people are saying, "Oh, insulate your houses, put solar panels on." Well, you know, great if you can afford it. That's terrific. But if you're living in rented accommodation, or you just don't have the, you know, you don't have 10 or 20K to spend on something where the payback is potentially in decades.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's really true. There's no way I can charge if I want to get an electric car charger, like where I live in Huntington. I mean, I'll probably have to go to the Sainsbury's car park and then, like, you know, just go there for like half an hour in between my work meetings.
But we're also starting to see cables like along, you know, in residential areas being slung across the street and stuff, which is not really good either. I think that problem will get sorted out by the market in the end, because, like, you know, the council doesn't provide petrol stations, does it? I mean, the market does, and that will get sorted out.
there are already sort of the technology is already sort of being created. The issue in this country is not because that's what the market will dictate that. The issue in our country is the delivery of infrastructure, and it's been a problem in our country for decades, absolute decades. But so the technology where you can literally in the same way that with a phone now you can slap your phone on a charger rather than plug things in and all that stuff. Literally driving a car over a charging space on a road, so you've got no cables or anything else, is something that is going to happen. But the reality in this country is that technology will be there. You've got to have the electric infrastructure that allows that to happen, but you've also got to have the means to and the will to actually deliver it as well along people's roads. But the technology is going to be there.
I mean, when one of the things that was the sort of genesis for this, when we all went to Stagecoach to their depot in Cambridge, and to basically move to electric buses, they had to build a substation. There are real practical things there.
Let's look a bit at the PCC results. Well, I see Stephen put another comment on.
Just a friend of mine, Kerry, as well, who talks about somebody who'd love to have an electric car but can't necessarily to afford one, or has the position to charge one now as well. So yeah, it's one of those things that it's a nice thing to have, isn't it? But at the moment, it's a bit of a middle class luxury, I think.
Yeah, I think. I mean, the point is also you still have the congestion. Like, I know it's disputed whether it exists or not, but like you still have the busy roads if everyone just replaced their car with the electric car. So you still have a necessity for public transport, regardless. Even if the government, hypothetically, and it will never be possible financially, but even if the government just paid for everyone to change their car to an electric car, you'll still have the busy roads in Cambridge City, or even busier.
We're supposed to be talking about elections though. 328 people.
That's why, though, you need to get the whole of your public transport infrastructure right and get the balance right, and that's the bit that Cambridge needs to enable. And unless it needs to find a way to do it. That's what I would say. But I absolutely agree with you. Just replacing petrol with electric cars doesn't actually solve Cambridge's problem.
And just it's virtue signaling to a degree, because I've got an electric car and it makes me feel less guilty about doing it, but there's loads of other emissions that come from electric cars.
It has a carbon footprint.
It just makes me feel a bit better and a bit self-righteous, not as much so as Alex with their constant bus posting.
Well, I have to rent. I had to rent a car for the local elections again to drop all those leaflet rounds. So I still am guilty of that too. But let's go back to the PCC elections. I'll just do a summary of what happened per district, and then we can comment on what we thought depending on which districts we're familiar with. So let's look at the PCC election vote. The vote shares by district. So in Cambridge City, the Conservatives got 24%, Labour 50%, and the Lib Dems 25.9%. So a very strong Labour vote as expected in Cambridge City, quite unsurprising there. East Cambs is really interesting in my view, because East Cambs has a 40%, so 40.1% Conservative vote, with the second being the Lib Dems on 30.8%, and then Labour actually very close on 29.1%. So actually that's like a kind of a closer Labour third than I expected in East Cambs, to be honest. And Fenland, which is very relevant for Martin here, Fenland is a strong Conservative lead of 53.4%, but with a Labour second of 29% and a more distant Lib Dem of 17%. So let's stop at those three first: Cambridge, East Cambs, Fenland. Like, what do you think? Any surprises there? What do you think about this?
Can I just say, well, and this occurred to me when I was looking at the results, is you have to realise that compared with the other districts, Fenland and East Cambs are tiny. So if you add Fenland and East Cambs together, they're only the same size as Huntingdonshire or South Cambs, and then Peterborough City's even bigger. Yeah, and what we had is and because the turnout was so low in South Cambs, in Huntingdonshire, in Fenland and East Cambs, and then we had there are third elections, but everybody was voting for district and city council elections in Cambridge and in Peterborough. Those people were getting a disproportionately large say in the outcome. And so when I was trying to work this out, I was basically disregarding lots of the low turnout, smaller places, because I thought that Peterborough and Cambridge would decide it. And I thought that because those areas are typically stronger Labour areas than almost anywhere else in the district, that was what would carry it as well. And I mean, that was nearly the story, wasn't it? But I think that maybe the SDZ hangover in Cambridge is what cost Anna the victory in the end.
I think the other interesting thing is there's, and it's a counterfactual, so you can't prove it, but there were only 3 candidates. There wasn't a 4th party. Because I was wondering if in Peterborough, I don't think Labour did as well as we'd hoped, and I wondered if that was people staying at home, and if there'd been another candidate, whether there would have been a perhaps a swing against Labour. But then, of course, Peterborough, you know, the Conservatives are really struggling at the moment. Had there been a Peterborough first candidate, I don't know how that would work for a, you know, Peterborough and Cambridgeshire wide thing. Would that have changed things? It just feels that Peterborough politics are particularly febrile. But there is the thing that the result was dominated by Cambridge and Peterborough. They're bigger, but also they happen to have local elections those days.
Well, Peterborough is really interesting because let's look at Peterborough and the vote share there. So Peterborough, actually, the Tories came first with 40.3% and Labour second on 39.2%, with the Lib Dems distant third at 20.4%. So actually, the Tories are like leading Peterborough, by a small percentage, but that is not necessarily what people predicted. I think there are many local factors to be considered. So Peterborough, of course, it's a target city. Yeah, so like both Labour and the Conservatives campaign very, very actively there. So compared to, let's say, comparing what happens in Peterborough to, I don't know, like Sawtrey in Huntingdonshire, like it's a different level of campaigning in terms of just the frequency of it, how many leaflets you get, like how many, you get door knocked and so on. So like that is one thing, but also there are like other local factors and issues in Peterborough that do influence voting behavior in ways that perhaps are not the same. They're definitely not the same in East Camps or South Camps and so on. So you can't really judge it without thinking about the local factors as well as the level of campaigning that's going on in those areas.
I mean, this is the thing. I mean, the other one, of course, is people. The jargon term for it is second order elections. They're not elections that people particularly care about, and people feel they can vote in a different way because the stakes are relatively low. So that might be part of it as well. I think there is a real problem with the PCC that people don't understand the role. I mean, Martin, I think perhaps you might be more in favour of the role than I am. I mean, certainly where you've got a Metro Mayor, I think having the 2 roles, I don't quite understand.
Yeah, were you involved in that, Martin, in the devolution or not? Did you? I suppose it was a national thing. Were you involved in the devolution of the PCC thing or not?
No, I wasn't. You sort of have discussions and had discussions about what was coming, and I had a little bit of involvement years ago with the idea of elected sheriffs with something which is what PCCs effectively are, and that was something that was put together a long time ago by it was an organisation, I think it was called Deep Blue, but it was run by I've forgotten his name, but he was a Conservative MP that actually defected to UKIP and called an election and won. When he did, called a by-election and won. But it was an organisation that he run that came up with a lot of these ideas around the elected sheriffs, actually the mayors as well, and the idea of having Metro mayors. And Greg Clark, basically, when he was in government and at DLUC and other roles, or what was DLUC then, whatever it was called, changes its name every 6 months. But he was the one that implemented a lot of those ideas. And actually, I think the PCC is not as successful. I think the elected mayors, I think the weekend showed that people care about them, but also there's an element where they break away from the national political trend, which is a good sign.
The best ones do, yeah.
Yeah. The reality about the PCCs, though, is do you want to go back to the police authorities, which is what was there before? People didn't know they existed.
Yeah,
And
but
actually,
I sit on the police and crime panel, so it's my job to scrutinise the PCC. Yeah, I'd rather be scrutinised the chief constable. Yeah, because at least that's one level of abstraction less. I feel like I get to poke the PCC with a stick, who then has to poke the chief constable with a stick, and that's not a very good method of controlling
Let me
people.
let me
It's
ask
abstract.
let me answer your question directly, Martin. Yes, nobody knows the PCC
Yeah,
exists. If
yeah,
people had a problem with the police, they'd say, "Oh, I want to talk to the police themselves in whatever form," or "Oh, I want to talk to the council." I don't think it works. The person you were thinking of was Douglas Carswell, I
that's
think,
correct.
and his organisation I think was called Bright Blue.
That's it.
Um,
Exactly right.
Wikipedia.
Oh,
Wikipedia.
come on! Don't confess, because we thought you were really clever. That's a very David Landon Cole kind of fact that you've pulled out. So you shouldn't confess about Wiki. We don't
Well,
look at
I
Wikipedia
didn't
anymore.
know Douglas Carswell founded Bright Blue. I used to, like, in my job, like I knew someone who worked at Bright Blue. So yeah, I didn't realize that.
Yeah, he once interviewed me for a job, and I didn't get it. And he called me the next day and said, "Actually, there were only two people that actually got what the role was. You were it, and the other one." And he gave it to the other one. And I think because they lived in London and I didn't.
Mm.
I mean, on the sorry, just on the, if you don't mind, Alex, if that's all right. On the PCC, and actually it is the electoral system changed, and that does make comparisons from last time difficult as well, because it's it is a different electoral system.
So Anna would have won, wouldn't she, under the old system? Wouldn't she?
Yeah.
Yeah. Go on. Sorry, David. Carry on
I
talking.
mean, you never know for sure, but like I'm quite confident.
Probably.
Because if you assume that like most Lib Dem voters will put Labour as a second preference, not everyone does, but it's like maybe like 2-1. So like it would have been one, because you needed another, what was it, like 3,000 votes or so. So I think it would have been doable.
The reality is, being blunt about it, with a Conservative brand as it is now, unless you've got a personality like Andy Street, and this applies to the West Midlands as well, nobody is going to put Conservative down as a second preference. Who put it down as a first? That's the reality. So I'd be pretty convinced that Anna would have won. I'm not convinced in the West Midlands though, and I think it's interesting that the thing that might have done for Andy Street was actually the move to first past the post for the mayoral elections, which was something that Priti Patel implemented. I think that's something that a few people need to reflect on, to be honest. I think Andy Street would have picked up absolutely shed loads of second preference votes.
Because he was a decent, not seen as being particularly party political, was he? And not a politician before he came into the role as well. And he's the sort of guy I might have voted for as well, because I think, having seen him interviewed, I think him and Andy Burnham are absolutely perfect examples of what a mayor should be. And so they're both great guys. And so it's shocking and a bit disappointing that he's lost, but the people on the right of the screen probably wouldn't agree with that. So
he also did something which was really, really, and this is where his role as a chief executive in the past has, made a difference. When he came into power in the West Midlands, obviously he came into power with a brand new, fresh combined authority. It'd been running as a shadow authority for a year or whatever. But what he did straight away when he became mayor was get the whole of the combined authority district, whatever colour that the council was, he got them rowing behind him really, really quickly, and that's one of the reasons why he got off to a running start.
That's what Nick struggled to do here, hasn't it? It's still completely fractured, although less and less so as the as districts change colour.
I think the combined authority here, as to be honest, at the moment, in the best state it's been for certainly for a long time. I think Nick's started to pull a good team around there now, and I think it's starting to work.
So I spoke to Nick when I was walking earlier, and I've invited Nick on the show in the next few weeks. We haven't got a date yet, but Nick will be coming on, so that will be a good. I guess with all that's happened in the West Midlands and all that's happened with the PCC elections, it will be a good time to interview him before he starts his campaign proper, because he'll be up for election in a year's time, won't he?
He will.
Yeah, there's all year round campaigning, so the campaigning never stops. But let's look at the results now, like as well, because we looked at Peterborough, and there's some comments around Peterborough as well, saying like, well, I'll just show this one on the screen. Peterborough is very unstable. So yeah, I think a lot of people assume that Peterborough is very predictable, whereas yeah, the politics there is perhaps less predictable than some people who are not living or didn't door knock in Peterborough think it might be. But I want to share this. So the other results we have, which are quite interesting, are in South Cambs. Again, it was quite surprising for me because in South Cambs is of course like the Lib Dems are campaigning very hard and the Conservatives, but like the Lib Dems are really putting it since 2 years ago at least a lot of effort in their parliamentary campaign there. But the Lib Dems did come second in South Cambs, not by far. So Conservatives on 35.8%, the Lib Dems on 35.2%, and Labour actually on 29, which is a much closer, like third overall per district than I expected, given that South Cambs, in terms of the district council, has a majority, has a lot of the Lib Dem seats and has no Labour seats on the district. If I'm right saying that, I think I am. So it's really interesting in that sense. And then, well, in Huntingdonshire, which of course, on the result per constituency, because it's and Stephen can comment about St. Neots and the different politics there, especially with the independents winning the by-election there. But
No,
yeah,
Lib Dems won the by-election, not us.
not the town.
Oh, town one. There was also
Yeah.
a district council by-election, which my
Oh
friend
yeah,
James Catmer. There was no
yeah.
independent candidate, and I would have supported James, and I think he's fantastic.
Yeah, I meant the town that we
Okay,
got
yeah.
over 1,000 votes, independent
Yeah.
votes, like actually a very high number of votes for an independent candidate. But Huntingdonshire was, as the district, 45.5% Conservative, with Labour second on 29 and the Lib Dems on 25.5. But it's really interesting because I was at the verification. I looked at like per area. There are actually differences between the Mid Cambs and St. Neots constituency and the Huntingdon constituency in terms of the share.
But
So
also,
that
there
is,
was no campaigning here because we're not, well, not from Labour, not much campaigning from Labour because you haven't selected a parliamentary candidate here.
yeah,
And it seems that everybody's, as far as I can see, everybody's election material is off the back of the parliamentary campaign with featuring the Police and Crime Commissioner. And actually, the amount of between the Conservatives and Lib Dems are doing around here, I think people just switch off on it after a while. How many Lib Dems leaflets can you read with bar graphs on them, or how many Conservative ones? No, I collect them all, but I don't really read them because I'm sure everybody else doesn't. So I think that's a bit of a problem.
Yeah, but I think there's just on that there is an issue with people reading, with people trying to read too much into these. You know what you can learn them, but also more generally, I think one of the takeaways across the country is that the Conservative vote has gone down a lot. No great surprise. Labour has been the beneficiary of that, but it seems in a lot of places people have gone for the party they think is best placed to beat the Conservatives. That seems to have happened a lot. I just find it interesting in that case, assuming that's fair. Where Labour has held up, where somewhere that I think some people would think would be a two-horse race, Labour Liberal, is more. I'm thinking South Cambs is more. Labour seems possibly competitive, but of course you can read too much into that because the people who are turning out for this election are the people who are most interested in politics, so on and so forth. So it's one of those things where anybody can go in and sort of find something in there, but I think I wonder how useful they are. I mean, there's some utility there, but it's you get where I'm going with it.
Yeah, you can't predict a general election. You can make a general election prediction based on a 20 or lower than 20% PCC election because it's different demographic engaging, and also because what really matters in general is how the people who don't know on the doorstep vote. Yeah. People who are generally don't know on the doorstep don't really vote in PCC elections in general. Yeah. It's many people who are already kind of decided or at least like have an idea or voted in the past. So it is very different how it will be in a general election, let's say in Huntingdon with a turnout of like between 60 and 70% as compared to what was it, like a 20% PCC election turnout. But it's still like interesting to see how the different areas compare.
Absolutely.
And some areas are quite surprising as well in terms of like, for example, South Cambs, for me, it was surprising seeing, like looking at how some of the rural areas in South Cambs did where you didn't necessarily expect Labour to be like such a close third or like even being second in some of the areas.
And
yeah, I saw Paul Bristow put up a comparison chart that showed that he was ahead in
Popular vote
in his constituency, and you know, I like Paul. I've known him a long time, but that's a Lib Dem bar chart if you're honest about it. And
he was claiming victory, wasn't he, in the Peterborough City Council elections? He was basically saying we won the popular vote, and like that's ridiculously dishonest.
I'm also not sure it's wise.
No, it's not. He's not wise.
Well, he's actually a sensible chap, but politics in Peterborough is a complete. It's such a strange and horrible place, actually. And you know, he's an MP in that environment, and that doesn't help him. But
he's also hitched his wagon to the same with Wayne Fitzgerald, because it is toxic, it is broken, yeah. And he's been, you know, him and Wayne with their silly comedy check, the Chuckle Brothers, going around town, that he's hitched himself to that. And he didn't need to, did he? He could have floated above it and been a proper MP rather than always fighting for a failing district council administration, which is now gone and seems to be hemorrhaging completely at this stage. So I think from him, I think that's a really foolish thing to do.
I wish he'd fought on national issues and focused on national issues within Peterborough a lot more. But I think the reality is he thought, you know, and he probably still does think that's the way it was to win. It was the same as, you know, they invented the fact that congestion charging is coming to Peterborough as a reason to for the veto in of the transport plan, the combined authority, and it just the trouble is anybody. You know, that message for some people, because it's an instant red message and it scares people, you know, it's the politics of no again. It's attractive to people, to some people, but anybody that reads sort of anywhere beneath the headlines and gets to understand it realizes that basically that's tosh.
It's really interesting how the conservative leaflets in parts of Cambridge City, which I have had the privilege to see whilst campaigning, like the main slogan was "Vote Conservative, keep driving free." So it is like, you know, very interesting, like how that is the single issue. And of course, you know, you deliver them with the PCC leaflet, but that is the message that you know stands out in front of you. Because if I pick up one PCC leaflet and one local councillor leaflet, and the council leaflet says "Vote Conservative, keep driving free," that's what my mind will focus on, rather than like whatever else the leaflet or the newsletter says on the, you know, bigger issues. So it's really interesting.
We've come back to this again. I'm going to keep quiet because otherwise
I'm not opening the congestion charge debate again, because I think we covered it. But it's interesting in terms of what slogans, like thinking about campaigning and the questions around how much people did campaigning and where, you know, which areas were door knocked as opposed to areas that didn't receive any literature from any of the parties, as opposed to areas that received literature from one of the parties or only two of the parties. And it's really interesting how different local issues are used, even if the election is not necessarily about those, you know, about those issues.
And the thing is, I think that's a problem, you know, so the Police and Crime Commissioner basically has nothing to do with a congestion charge. You know, the role of the Police and Crime Commissioner doesn't. And I'm not just having to go there. You see that with all parties, you know, all elections. You know, you know, it's a problem but also there's the sort of system of government we have is quite complicated and quite centralized, and so a lot of the decisions that have to be made are from the top. And I just, you know, you understand why people get frustrated, but then you have this thing, you know, I've had some people saying to me, well, why didn't we get any leaflets? And it's like, you know, it's like, well, they lived in Abbots Ripton, I think it was, and it's like, with the best will in the world, you know, I don't think they'd had any leaflets from any party. It's like, well, because there aren't enough people to deliver, you know, to deliver him.
If anyone wants to make a donation, so I can like actually send it by Royal Mail, please, please don't. No, I'm just plugging in, but I think it's a serious point about like party resource. I think it's true about like the Lib Dems and the Tories as well. There are some areas with more volunteers than others, and it's up to the candidate as well, like to recruit volunteers and so on, and like which areas you prioritize. And I do think there's like in a way a deficit of democracy, because naturally parties will focus on the areas they target, right? where they think they have a chance of winning. And this means that like not everyone will receive the same information or have the same access to the democratic information you should have to have an informed vote. Ideally, you'd have like a leaflet from all of the candidates standing, so you can actually read it, like compare their policies, what they say, but that's not how things usually happen.
All right, can I just say that? Can I just say my heart bleeds for you and your big political party machines when we see the real victors in the Peterborough City Council elections are Peterborough First, which are a group of ragtag independents. Yeah, well, there's 14 of them now. There's 15 of us on Huntingdonshire District Council, where we're the biggest group in the administration. They're the second biggest group. Yeah, they don't have those resources, but that's the big difference, is they've managed to turn that around. And so we've got 29 independents in Peterborough and Huntingdonshire, none of whom have got any right to a seat on the combined authority, because the combined authority constitution doesn't allow us to be there, which is, I think that's a big issue and one I'm going to start campaigning on soon. Go on.
The thing for me on this, part of the conversation we've been having is the low turnout for the Police and Crime Commissioner elections. And part of that is people have had a ballot paper at the door and they've had nothing else. So they don't understand it. And you think about a general election where all of the parties and all of the candidates get one free post that the Royal Mail will deliver for free. And so the argument is, if you really are going to continue with Police and Crime Commissioner elections, you allow a free post as part of the election. So at least people understand that they are voting for something and have a bit more of an understanding of what it is.
In London, there is a single booklet that I think is sent to everybody.
Yeah,
everybody gets a page in the booklet.
Yeah,
and I think that's quite a good idea.
We got that here, didn't we? Before the mayoral elections, there was.
I think, I mean, the thing is, I guess it's quite expensive to do. Someone's got to pay for that, and it's got to be posted to everyone, and you've got to have an up-to-date sort of electoral roll, which you have anyway. But I think in terms of getting people out to vote, it might be quite a good thing. To a certain extent, the expense is irrelevant. If you're going to do democracy, you don't do democracy on the cheap, do you? You do it so it works. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the booklet is also like, I've seen those ones in What You Mean, David, in London, and it's quite good because everything's in a similar format as well. So in a way, it's like easier to compare, like as someone, let's think about someone who's not very involved in politics, or perhaps doesn't have like time or capacity to read a lot of like political stuff like we do every single day. Actually having something like, okay, there are 4 candidates, I can read all their statements, kind of compare them, is quite useful, rather than you receive a leaflet today and another leaflet in a month's time, and like a leaflet that like looks particularly odd and you just like recycle it anyway because it doesn't seem very official. So yeah, it is interesting. Back to Stephen's point, obviously for independence is much more difficult, but I can leaflet Abbey division, my county division, myself. Yes, it's difficult, but I can leaflet every single door of like 4,500 houses. I can't leaflet the whole Huntingdon constituency myself. that is the issue. I mean, I could if I just quit my job and my county council role and everything else, and like spend 8 hours every day just like doing all the leaflets. I could, but unfortunately, I have to pay my rent. But it's possible in a city council or like district council election if you really want to.
That's how I got elected to county council, was doing that. So.
Yeah, but it's obviously more challenging in terms of resources for independents as well. So that's one of the barriers in politics, just the financial resource as well to produce those leaflets, and obviously then your time and whether people have the capacity and the free time to actually do all of this work. Anything else on the PCC elections? How are we all feeling?
PCC, Peterborough City Council, or the Police and Crime Commission? That was confusing as well. So we had two PCC.
We can comment on Peterborough, because although like the Tories came first in the Police and Crime Commissioner count, in Peterborough, obviously the City Council, there were very good results from Labour and the independent groups as well.
Yeah.
If you look beyond Cambridgeshire, Festus Akinbosoye, I've probably mispronounced his name, lost to Labour in Bedfordshire. Avon and Somerset, Labour picked up. There are a few other places where Norfolk, Labour picked up. So there were a few places that Labour picked up PCCs. So there were some. I repeat my earlier comments on that. I mean, I think Festus in Bedfordshire was, I think, actually quite well known, and I think quite prominent. So I think a little bit of a surprise that he lost, maybe. but it may be that, you know, if Andy Street with his name recognition can't resist the tide, then maybe it's that. Yeah.
How about Peterborough? Any thoughts on the Peterborough City Council and what happened there? Actually, I think it's the youngest, or if not one of the youngest, city councillors elected. I've seen the news coverage on I think
which is great news, isn't it? It's great to have young. We had two 18-year-olds, Liberal Democrats, Nathan Hunt and Claire, were elected 2 years ago. And having them on board is fantastic, because it makes me feel really old, and it's much more relevant to younger people. So it's amazing to have her elected, a younger person. It's a bit of a train crash at the Peterborough City Council elections for the Conservatives, wasn't it? It's been coming for a while, I think. But go on, Martin.
Yeah, if you look at the results for Peterborough, what I found is interesting is the Conservatives have almost, the last couple of years, they've sort of bucked the trend compared to what's been going on nationally, and they've sort of held their own. But what they've done all the time with that is they sort of have just held on. And what's happened this time, it's just tipped the other way. I mean, some of them, you know, there are some really close losses for the Conservatives, but it just went the other way.
2 votes.
No surprise. I think the controversy in Peterborough over recent months has only helped the opposition.
But I suppose the other big upset is Nick Sanford lost the mayor.
Yeah, which is a pity, isn't it? As well, he's a fantastic guy, and you know, I think he's their parliamentary candidate as well, isn't he, against Bristow? Is Nick? So then I mean, it's a really sad way, but that's what I love about politics. It doesn't matter how long you serve. Is at some stage, if you keep doing it, you're either gonna die, quit, or lose an election.
I mean, well, yes, but there is a problem. That also means that there are good, hard-working councillors who will have lost their seat because people won't vote for their colour, party affiliation colour. I mean,
yeah, but that's what's wrong with politics, is that, and this is what I don't understand, is what I keep trying to. I don't want to ask you too much, but sometimes as a party political candidate, you must look at the people on the ballot paper and realize that your party candidate isn't the best person, and that's difficult, isn't it? It's really hard. That's where loyalty comes in, and I'd always want to vote for the best person. I suppose even I don't do it sometimes, and I'll vote for political reasons. But in general, it means that the best people aren't always elected because of this stupid national politics thing, which has very little to do with what's happening in local authorities.
I mean, it's a difficult one. That the first thing is, you can say you voted who you want, to be honest. So there is that, even when you're part of a party machine. But the reality, you know, the bigger picture with party politics and as a group, and this is why political groups can be helpful. I think there's a fantastic role for independents, but the reality of, you know, the party politics is, you know, it's the whole team principle where, you know, as a Conservative, you know, my view was always that, you know, I might get 80% of what I want. 80% of what I want rather than 100%. But as an independent, especially at a time when there weren't the number of independents around that there are now, you just got nothing.
And it's like herding cat. It's like herding cats sometimes. It's not always easy. And like, look at county council, there's a lot more independents now, but they're not my independents. You know, they don't share my. I think at HTC we're quite lucky, because I think most of the people, although there's probably quite a broad spectrum of political affiliation amongst the, you know, natural political affiliation amongst the independents, we're all kind of local champions and community volunteers, and that helps bind us together. But there are different types of independents who I wouldn't, even at county council, I'm not going to sit with Ryan Fuller, you know, for lots of reasons. And so that makes it more difficult. And just trying to hold that group, I'm not sure, I've never been in a political group, but it's not always easy being an independent as well. It's working quite well, nice at the moment, but the going's quite good. When it gets more difficult, I
used to find it frustrating sometimes, especially on votes that didn't matter. You know, and you know, I remember one occasion where I think it was we had the Constitution up for debate, and I think that was the reason that we'd already made the decision to move towards the committee system. And once that decision had been made by the council legally, we weren't allowed to reverse it again during the year. So during that year, everything was going on to move us into committee system. And one of the things was a change to the constitution. And one of the changes was to change the reference to him/her in the document. And I remember it, and I remember being told we got to whip this. We can't let the Lib Dems win this amendment. It's horrific and all this stuff, and the nature of that. And I just said, let's just put it to a free vote. I really don't care.
Yeah.
And those are the times when it's frustrating.
Yeah, I've never been whipped. I don't like the whole concept of it. I haven't, and sometimes I vote with the Conservatives.
I can say with hindsight, there are times, certainly when I was a Fenland councillor, where I wish I'd been strong enough to resist the whip. It's, the last time Fenland's local plan was agreed, I wish I'd had the strength just to say I'm not supporting it. Difficult though, because I was also leader at county at the time. But history says that local plan has done the Fenland no service at all, and a local plan isn't supposed to do a council a disservice.
I mean, the first time I voted against administration at county council, I thought, oh, what's going to happen now? I'm going to get in trouble, and nothing happened. They just don't invite me for lunch anymore, so that's a bit different.
Well, the problem is that when you have enough people like voting against,
it doesn't make any difference, does it? Because they're easy votes. Things I vote on, they're never. I mean, if I was going to overturn an administration vote, that would be a different matter. But
it's only one of you voting. If it's only one, it doesn't make a difference.
You do, and if you've got a decent majority, and even when you haven't, actually, common sense allows you to let people be a rebel when it really matters to them.
Yeah, that's healthy.
Because otherwise, there's no point in being in politics. Because one of the reasons you stand for election is because you've got a bit of a conscience, and then the first thing that happens to you when you become part of a group at a council is they whip the conscience out of you.
Yeah,
and that'll stop people getting involved.
Well, it may be more challenging when you have a majority of one on a committee, but yes, in full council debates, like Stephen voting in a different way, it's like, minus one vote. If I had a majority of one, that would be very, very challenging.
They were sitting me next to all the Labour lot as well, and they were kind of things like GCP, which are really important to Labour. I thought, oh, these are my mates.
It's also beholden on the individual who chooses to do that, to understand the consequences.
Yeah.
And you should have the quality of people elected to understand that, and when they do decide to use the conscience, to understand what the consequences are and what they can be. I think that's and also not to take somebody by surprise with it would be the thing for me. I'd always have a conversation with somebody and say, I'm not doing this, sorry.
I agree with you. It's a town council, we don't have a whip. The first vote I ever took as a town councillor was different to the way that the other three on Labour councillors on the town council voted, whatever that's worth, which isn't much. But there is a sort of act versus rule utilitarianism thing here. That Stephen, you can go on about the problems with parties and so on. At some point, we'll have to have a discussion about that. But we have a party-based system, and it is largely premised on people working together across committees and so on, across different across bodies, across different levels and so on. So that in that there is a need for some degree of party discipline, because one of the things people are voting for is a party. People will have voted for you, much as I like you, Stephen. Will people have known your policies in any great detail when you were first elected, when you stood as an independent? Now, I think there is a problem that when the parties we've got at the moment are too broad and not coherent enough, and I think it would be one of the effects of proportional representation in the UK would that you would get the parties splitting, and you would have more parties that made more sense. If Labour runs from Tony Blair to John McDonnell, and the Conservatives run from, well, I was going to say Martin, but Martin's not a Conservative, but I don't know,
Andy Street.
Yeah, Andy Street all the way to Suella Braverman.
Mm,
I mean, that's kind of a problem.
mm,
I'm aware that it can go too far the other way, and you end up with, parties which are you do want parties to be a broad church, and they have to be coalitions of one sort and another, but they can be both too broad and too narrow. And at the moment, one of the problems we have in the UK is being too broad.
Can I just say, David, just before we go, you might not have a whip at Huntington Town Council, but you do have chains and you do have a cell. And I only know that because you took me down there, mate. So don't try and make out it's not as kinky.
I'm sorry. So there is more than one cell in Huntington.
Who'd you rent that out to?
Because the building used to be the courts, and so one of the cells has been, or two cells have been knocked through, and they're now the museum curator's office. One is a loo, and the other, which has got this sort of, like a jail cell gate with a solid great lock on it, is storage. We do have a load of jail cells.
They also like dressing up a Huntington Town Council as well. But
if I'm allowed to say, I absolutely 100% agree with David on this. By the way, I'm one of the things about stepping away from party politics is it gives you a little bit more independence of thought, and I have I benefited from, and I've absolutely come to the conclusion that this country is politically going to be an absolute mess until it moves towards PR. I've spoken to Conservative MPs who've admitted to me that they are politically closer to the centre ground and the centre ground of the Labour Party than they are to people like Priti Patel and Suella Braverman. But the party whip and the party system constrains them. And, if you think about how coalitions are formed as part of PR, it's where those two sort of bodies rub up against each other. That you get new thought and stuff like that, but actually that's where agreement can come, and there'd be a far more consensus in that middle ground than there ever would come from, a one nationist and what Suella Braverman and her ilk are talking about at the moment. And it absolutely makes no sense at all. And for me as a one nationist, I want to vote for a one nationist party, and we don't have one in the UK at all anymore. We have a Conservative Party that pretends to have one nationism and mentions one nationism as a bit of tokenism every now and again. It just does not have a one nationist heart to it at all.
Well, no, but I mean, the Disraeli would turn in his grave at what the Conservative Party has become.
100%. I could talk about this forever, by the way. It's something I'm really, really passionate about. And the Disraeli point is really important. If you look at where Disraeli was and the time that the world was at that point, Disraeli made that reference about one nationism, about two nations and us being a party of the rich and the poor. He made that statement at a particular point in time when people's view was not a view of the world, it was a view of the UK, and the poor were becoming utterly disillusioned and more disillusioned about that status and that two-nation system at that time. If you take that now, you can apply that thing about two nations, and you can take that perspective coming from the poor of the world, not just the poor of the UK. And what you've got to do is adapt one nationism to actually reflect that. And that's where you start to get thinking about how you deal with things like immigration.
I mean, so I actually think the one nation is increasingly relevant in the UK again, because the haves and the haves not. I mean, the thing is, there is still and because the population of the world is so big, it's a huge number of people, but percentage wise, the people who are very, very, very poor is less than it was. If you look at the economic improvements, or the Chinese economy is doing vastly better than it was since it started to open up. And given that we're talking about local elections in the UK, why am I about to mention Deng Xiaoping? Sorry, I do this a lot, but there is a point here that
yeah.
This is but this is on the One Nation thing is people feel really disconnected from I think not just politics, but if you like the state writ large, or the sort of institutions that we have in the UK, people feel distance from, and and if you like, since 2008, things have been various shades of grim. We had the 2008 financial crisis, Brexit, COVID, inflation. There's been a whole series of knocks that have made things really hard for people. I will add into that austerity, that weakened the ability of, we were seeing the fallout now in local government. I'm just thinking, and it wasn't. I mean, I'm not as old and decrepit as I looked, but when I finished university, it wasn't a case of, are you going to get a good job? It was, which job are you going to take? So just a few years later, people going to university coming out going, oh, what was the point of that now? And also now I owe 30, 40, 50 grand or I have 30, 40, 50 grand of debt, and that starts to lead to quite a dangerous thing when people don't feel they have any stake in the society. That starts to become really quite dangerous in terms of sort of social cohesion and so on. But the other thing is, it's to bring that back takes an awful lot of work. And with the next general election, look, no surprise to anybody, I will be enthusiastically voting for Dr. Alex Bulat to be Huntingdon's MP. But beyond
thank you for the live endorsement, David.
I would if I could.
I don't think that's a surprise to anyone really. But Labour is in all likelihood going to form the next government. There are some things that Labour is going to be able to do, Labour will be able to do, that will improve things. But there's the financial situation is still going to be really tough. Even if there are some rabbits in hats, it's still going to be tough. But there's also an awful lot of money that needs to be spent just on sort of sometimes literally stopping buildings falling apart. Hinchingbrook Hospital, for instance. And then the sort of some of the social things where, let's say, and whether it's called Sure Start or whatever, if you had something like Sure Start again, the benefits from, you set it up, people start going into that, and it gets fully going in 2, 3, 4 years. You get the benefits of that or something like that in 5, 10, 15, 20 years. Where are we going to get there? There's a point that Kerry has made in comments. Sorry, I'll shut up in a minute. About housing first policy. There is we do really have a housing problem.
It's the root of everything.
Well, it is, but at the same time, and I know that you three know vastly more about this than I do, but the planning system is a cluster. It really is. And so at the same time, so I get this from people just in my patch in Huntingdon saying, well, why are you at district speaking in favour of this big development? You do your best to explain it, but it's like, well, that's more houses going, and we're losing green space. That is a real loss to people. There's a difficult sale to make, and I'd love to be able to go out and say, oh, there's going to be loads and loads of affordable houses. Because of the viability, it's going to be 20% affordable, and it's like, and I do, I do my best to explain that, but I completely understand why people then turn around and say, oh, you're just another politician who's trying to, do whatever you want.
Martin's got a lot of expertise in this. I think it would be worth having an entire episode on talking about solving the high housing crisis.
I can talk about almost any political topic forever, but this one in particular, it's what I make a living out of, to be honest. And part of what I do is try and bring communities and decision makers together a little bit with developers. And a lot of what you say is true, but it's also true that It's the same thing about political leadership, and there's too many councillors that engage in what I call political fellowship. So the community says X, therefore they repeat that all the time, and actually that's not what a community leader does. As a councillor, you are there to represent your community in the council. That's correct, but you are also there to represent your council in the community, and that means putting both sides of the housing argument across. And there are not enough councillors willing to do it. I just want to go back about, the one nationism point and bring it back local, because it's really important. And this is something that I think the Labour Party coming into government need to get to grips with. And that's the reality about, if you look at Cambridgeshire, so Cambridge City, they talk about, and Alex will know this more than anybody else because of the ward she represents, the disparity between the haves and the have-nots within Cambridge City is, I think, is it widest in the country, or one of the widest in the country. And you've got the deprivation as it exists in Wisbech at the moment. And the reality is, and you could say this across the whole of the country almost, not completely, the reality is we have not, and that issue has existed for generations, and we have not solved it. And the only way we're going to solve it is to make it a priority and make it a spending priority. And that is dealing with some of the issues we're talking about, like congestion charging, and like, how do you get and make Wisbech a connected town? That's the reality, because it is all about, I used to say this as leader, if you can get goods, people and data moving around the county, the economy will thrive. And that fundamentally, to me, is where the focus needs to be. That's why I also think the combined authority is a really important role, because nobody else can do that is enabled to do it in the way the combined authority is.
Yes, the integrated transport and being able to actually integrate the connections as well, because I was thinking about, the anti-poverty initiatives and how a lot of the approach, and that's not only Cambridgeshire, but across the UK, a lot of the approach is, okay, we have some funds from central government, we're going to give out some vouchers or some sort of payment, some sort of short-term fix. And it's great because, you have £100, £200 to buy some household goods, to do your shopping, to feed your children. But then after that money ends, if you didn't solve the causes of the problem, you go back into the same cycle, because you still didn't access employment or the right type of employment for you. You still didn't develop the skills, and you still didn't claim all the benefits you're entitled to. So it's kind of like a short-term fix. And then we're spending lots of the government grants on this without addressing it as a whole. And I do agree, transport and the connectivity plays a huge part in this.
The thing around one nationism, which I talk about quite a lot, the one nationism, one of the principles of one nation is not just about young people, absolutely not. But one of the things about one nation is every child should leave the education system with a ladder in front of them, so they know exactly where and the path they're going to take. And that's good. That to me is good one nationism. And if you start with that as a principle, and that includes making sure that you drive ambition through your education system as well, and actually what that's about is getting rid of this principle that we've become obsessed with in this country, that the only measure of education that there is the number of certificates that somebody leaves school with.
This is something that we've never got right in the UK. Which is the parity. Well, many things in education, but parity of esteem between academic education and vocational education, or whatever you want to call it. I've go to Germany through a master builder. It's not just that you've got a good job that pays well and you've got the skills, but that actually has some social standing. Whereas in the UK, you wouldn't have that. That sort of position in society as well. That's a real problem. And you see, it's like I've gone through. I mean, Alex and I have both gone and done PhDs and all the rest of it. That's great. That's one way of doing things, but it's doing that track is seen as the optimum. That when you leave school, you want to go to university. Now, if people want to go to university, they should be able to go to university. And this with a different hat on, I've got with apprenticeships and so on. finding decent apprenticeships for people is really, really hard. You know, at the same time that you've got the aerospace sector, which, you know, long story, has got a skills problem. You don't have the apprentices to get people in there, and there's got to be some, you know, there's got to be some way of addressing that. And the thing is, it's until we do, and I think fundamentally this is a class thing as well, until we you know, address that. If you go to university, you're better. We're going to have those problems.
I mean, we have to do another episode on this because I'm really passionate about this, because I'm actually deliberately encouraging people that I see would be very good at vocational roles not to go to university.
Yes.
Although I spent time teaching at university and I did the PhD, and definitely I have to say I don't need the PhD to bundle those leaflets I have in my house or to be a good organizer in a political
I
campaign.
wouldn't go
You
to
can be a great
university.
political organizer without university, for sure.
If it was
You mentioned
degree apprenticeships as well. Go on. Sorry, I wouldn't go to university.
Earlier on, Councillor Hunt, Nathan Hunt, who I think is less than half my age. I know he earns more than I do. He went through as an apprenticeship to become an electrician.
No, he works for National Power. He works for National Power, and he describes himself as being on the spanners, is how he describes his job. But he's, you know, and if you want to have somebody who's got a good inside track on energy security and environmental sustainability, then Nathan is the bloke. So Nathan's on the spanners.
Yeah, but if you were, and I'm sorry, I'm dominating things a bit here. I'll shut up. But if most parents, I think, say, who would you rather? What would you rather for your child? You know, degrees coming into the wazoo or electrician?
Yeah, no, trades. I would definitely encourage my kids to have trades at the moment, because I think university is kind of done, isn't it? Or at least degree apprenticeships, which are really, really good ways of going to university.
I've got a DVD somewhere of my first party conference speech.
Get that out. Put that on.
We should live stream it next time.
There's a promise for you, Stephen. I'll find it for you. But the thing I talk about in there is exactly this issue, and the fact the difference between higher education and further education, and making the point that higher education is not better than further education. It's just different. And you know, that's I think pretty much part, you know, what David was saying about the difference in esteem and everything else, and it's daft, because actually, you know, the guys you see in making money at the moment are the ones that are in those trades and you know, and have done those apprenticeships and stuff. And I think we are getting better with apprenticeships, but we've got a long way to go.
And don't get me wrong, going to university is fantastic. I learned a lot, and you know, through the degrees I've done. But it doesn't have to be the default.
But I also think it's more than like what you're saying. Very interesting about Germany, and like the different, like how you have different social standing depending on different jobs culturally. But I think it's also something about having like pride in work, and like how certain work is perceived as having less pride. Because I think because I grew up in like the Romanian education system, which is very different. Like, you know, before I moved here at 18, I think like whether like I do a basic skill of like bundling some leaflet bundles, or like I have to do them later, so like they're on my mind, or like just doing some data entry, or I do a very kind of like, you know, task that needs a high level of education, I'm still like proud, like, oh, I finished the job, I got like the job done, like I'm really like proud of like whatever task I do. And I think that's what we're like we have to encourage more of, like, whether, you know, no matter what job you do, every job contributes to society, and we should be like proud of like doing a good job at whatever job we're doing.
I agree with that, but there's another part of this that I think is really important, and I think this is part of where the drive towards universities sort of happened, which is, and I'm always a big advocate of, you know, when you're looking at policy, look at how the world is changing when you're looking at that policy, rather than just designing a policy for now. This is one of the conversations I have about electric cars. It's a similar thing about look where electric cars are going, not where they are now. But you know, with education, with the growth in AI and technology, the number of unskilled jobs that are around are going down and down and down. And what we have to do is design a system that is able to adapt to that, but also create belief in people that they're capable of better than unskilled work as well, so that, you know, our country and our system can adapt to the change that is coming.
There is also a thing that we have to train people for. Sorry, let me start again. You have to train people for jobs that don't exist yet.
Yeah, I agree.
in 5 or 10 years, artificial intelligence wrangler is going to be a job.
Yeah, I think, I mean, this local election conversations for the PCC moved into all sorts of topics.
Good sharing, Alex.
So we're still having over 500 viewers, so that's very good indeed. And I see some comments coming in as well. So, what topic would you like us to discuss next time? So I think we have a few
I've already
ideas.
got somebody booked next time. So next time we've got Paul Salmon from National Highways coming in.
Oh,
next
very
Friday
excited! It's my favorite topics, like the.
So we can talk
the
about
potholes on
A428, A14. So we've got that coming up. I've also got Nick Johnson wants to come out. I think we should try and get Daryl Preston as well, new PCC, and get him to try and justify the role to us, because lots of the criticism from us and from everybody else is like they don't think it's a good role. So maybe if Daryl will come on this, I know him. Next time I see him, I'll invite him. It'll be really good to hear his side of the story as well. I also want to say thank you to Martin to coming on today. You know, we often get accused of being a bit lefty, and we sometimes have conversations
because
where Alex and David like, oh, you have to play the Conservative this time, and like. That's why we've got. Well, first we've got Martin here as well, and also I've just loved looking at Martin's office and looking at all the memorabilia at the back. So we need to have another discussion about that. So if you've watched this and you've enjoyed Martin's contribution, then maybe you should beg for him to come on again, because I think he's done a great role.
But I mean, first of all, I get accused of being a lefty by Conservatives, by the way. So saying that, from my perspective, it's been an absolute pleasure, mate. I've really, really enjoyed it. All of you, it's been great. It's really good to do something like this that stretches your political brain. And you know, the idea, you know, I said before about, you know, good politics comes about from when people's ideas and thoughts rub against each other, and there's a real benefit of that. And it's been great.
But suggest any other topics. Anybody wants to hear any other topic? We need still not to talk about the new Cambridge, what's it called, Cambridge 2050 Case for Cambridge thing. Haven't done that yet as well.
Michael Gove's proposals.
Michael Gove's proposals. We need to talk about that. We need to talk about development, the amount of development that's going on in Cambridgeshire, and also the whole, you know, and how that fits in with the housing crisis, and making sure we build the right type of houses. So that would also be a good conversation as well, I think.
Yeah, I think that's something for like just a housing topic, because there's this whole conversation about what is affordable, and I have many views on this, and like how we use the term affordable, and also like what we mentioned today as well about like how like the more, you know, you want to make development smaller, the less you can actually deliver like whatever affordable means of housing. And we can discuss a lot of about this in like under like a housing and kind of like planning reform topic as well.
I'm your man for that.
So next time with Martin, I maybe after the national highways and the potholes conversation, I actually drove to Harlow for like obviously the elections to help some colleagues there, and I have a lot of questions about some of the national highways issues there.
So for national highways, we can talk about the 40-mile-an-hour limit on the A. I can't remember the number. You know the one I mean in town.
Well, for Huntington to Fenstanton.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. I mean that has been addressed. The county is like, for anyone watching who's annoyed about this as I am, like when I'm on there, it has, in my understanding, that part of the road has been adopted by the county, but that we're still waiting for some process, and I'm not on the highways committee to deal with that. But I know that Jonathan Janogly is also like aware of this, and like everyone is involved. It's just like a question of time until they get sorted. But yeah, I know everyone is very frustrated about that because it doesn't make sense.
So National Highways this Friday, get your questions in. You can post on any of our Twitter or Facebook feeds as well, and I'll try and advertise it so we can have the questions. So if you want to get your questions so that we can give them to Paul ahead of time so he's a bit prepared and we don't just blindside him on the day, that would be good as well.
Yes, do write your comments on anything to do with national highways and suggest some more topics for the future. I think it also just shows today how this comment around like how broad some of the political parties are, because Martin was saying he gets called a lefty. I'm usually called right wing in like the Labour Party. So it is different. Yes, we did the conservative test, Stephen. Like you're more lefty than I am. Like, stop pretending.
There was a whole thing where one of the Conservatives said that independents are just left wingers who can't get selected, and the whole of the Labour group turned around and pointed at me, and it's funny because it's true.
Yeah, I think if you're a party member, you would get selected, but like we can't select non-party members, of course. Like there are rules within political parties, but it is interesting, like how this could be like a different debate about like this whole left-right spectrum and how has shifted over time. And I do notice this on the doorstep as well, how people tend to vote more with specific local issues or the personal, what they perceive to be like someone who can get the job done, as opposed to the more like broader party lines that in the past were a bit more common, like, well, I've always voted conservative, my family always voted conservative, I'll vote the same, or I've always voted Labour, I'll vote the same. I think politics is so much more volatile nowadays. That's really interesting to have those conversations. And I see East-West Rail, which is something I will probably spend 5 hours on it.
Yeah, I mean, sorry, I just wanted to pick up on something you said there, Alex.
Yeah.
I think that people don't vote the way, people don't vote Labour or vote Conservative because their parents voted Labour and their grandparents, all of that. And people are much more willing to change now from election to election. And things are just more volatile. And yeah, it's interesting. It makes things less predictable.
But that's how it should be, because if you think about the Conservative Party now compared to where it was even 15 years ago, it's a completely different beast. It's not the same party. And if you think about, I'm obviously not as intimate with the Labour Party as Alex and David are, but if you think about the Labour Party from the late 70s compared to what it is now, it's so, if you vote Labour because your granddad always voted Labour, well, you're voting for something completely different.
So yes and no. I mean, there are. I mean, Labour isn't Nye Bevan's party, but I think you could make a case that it's still Clem Attlee's party. There are approaches where the specific policy things might be different, but the sort of approaches you're taking are similar. There's a lot I can find in The Future of Socialism, for instance, from the 70s. You wouldn't call what he was Gosling was talking about socialism. You'd call it sort of some sort of social democracy or something now. Similarly, within, and there are tensions and within political traditions that should be in conversation with each other. Similarly, within the Conservatives, there is a conversation between the one nationist tendency and if you like, the more small government. You do, at the moment, unfortunately, the bit that's in the ascendancy is this sort of, and also the sort of faith, flag and family tradition. But at the moment, what you've got is this sort of hideous chimera of insanity that seems to have taken over the Conservatives.
It's called the culture war. The culture war tendency.
Well,
the Conservative Party is in a dreadful, dreadful place at the moment. The trouble is, I can't see how the mainstream of the party gets dragged back into the centre ground. It's not going to just take an election defeat. The only thing that will make a difference is somebody like Andy Street sticking to his guns and saying the sorts of things he said yesterday again and again and again. But the reality is the Conservatives have not just got to go through the election defeat that's coming to start to mend. They will go through that election defeat. They will drift to the right, and then they will get smashed again. And that's the point where it will start to mend. But the reality, everybody talking about the Conservative Party, the issue is division and everything else. It's not. The issue is not the division. It's part of it. But the issue is that its policy base at the moment is absolutely stupid. And that's what the starting point is.
On that very positive note, well, Stephen, you're on mute. I was going to say on that positive note, we should wrap up.
Somehow Martin dragged it back onto elections for 1 second there, which was kind of... No, can you say something about buses just to keep the theme going?
What's your favorite bus route, inexistent bus route, or bus route that should happen in Finland?
Do you have buses in Finland?
Yeah, I know. I've been to Wisbech many times, and
I've got better buses in Huntingdonshire.
Trying to go to March.
Two things I will say. The first one is if I was after one improvement, it's one that the mayor has actually talked about in his stuff, which is later buses from Whittlesea to Peterborough, so people can enjoy the Peterborough economy without having the expense of having to grab a taxi to get home. I think it's really important. If I was to make one change, it would be basically to concrete over the what is the route that everybody knows is going to be marched to Wisbech Rail, and start enabling it for a future driverless pod system, so that you can actually start to drive future transport through Fenland. And the sooner they do that and bite the bullet and recognise that heavy rail isn't going to happen and actually light rail isn't the answer, the better. Because those issues around Wisbech, the big issues with Wisbech are all about connectivity. And the more you can do to improve connectivity, the more you will solve the problems there.
Any favorite bus routes, David and Stephen, in the last week or so?
Ting.
I haven't. I am guilty of, like, I had the car last week because I had to deliver so many leaflets and leaflet rounds, so like I didn't. But now I returned it on Friday, so now I'm back on the buses on Tuesday going to Cambridge from Huntingdon. So I'll post the bus updates again.
I was off to St Neots this week on earlier in the week on Ting, and yeah, I still love it.
I've not been on the Ting, but I really like the idea. I've also been on I was on the guided when I went to see Stephen for a beer the other week. I took the guided bus into Huntingdon and then the train down to St Neots.
And I had to walk him back to the train station because we were both very, very drunk as well. So that's as close as I got to enabling public transport was pushing Martin on a train back to Fenland.
You know me well enough, Stephen. I don't drink anymore.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
That's why we need later night bus, and that's actually an issue, like for like Cambridge to Huntingdon. And I'm really looking forward if the mayor is implementing direct route, because the idea, like I get invited sometimes, like, do you want to come to the pub in Cambridge by my friends, like Labour friends there, and I'm like, no, not really, because I have to leave at like 8 o'clock to like do the 2 hour, like the 1 hour 40 bus back to Huntingdon. So I do think not only to support the pubs and the pub industry, but also for any kind of cultural events, I think we need to have a bit later like public transport on a lot of those routes, especially those into Cambridge. But it's not that bad as other areas, but it can and should be better.
If you want to go back to ULE and congestion charging and everything else, when people say that congestion charging punishes the poor, here is my answer. How is it that enabling people to travel quicker and cheaper into Cambridge City is bad for the poor?
Well, we should maybe revive.
Let's not go down that wormhole. 1 hour 36 minutes in.
Well, Stephen Stephen and I think being on the county council for about a couple of years, having those debates. I think over the last 3 years having those debates, I think we don't want to revive it. However, I do think that like whatever happens with this, we do need to discuss about transport, because it might not be the congestion charge plans have been voted down, they're not going ahead, but like what else could subsidize the buses? And I think that's the very difficult decision and political issue, is as much as people want to say, well, of course we want more transport, but who is going to pay for it? And if we're not doing a charge, right, what else can we do? Because the reality is you can't have rural buses without public subsidy, because it doesn't work with the commercial model. So what else funds it?
But the flip side of that is really important too, which is the impact of not doing it, and the financial impact of not doing it, and that is huge, and that's the bit that we should really focus on, and that's why there's some things being talked about with the Cambridge Delivery Group around tax increment funding and stuff like that, and that's the agenda that the Cambridge expansion, should be delivered on, because that is the way, and it's how so many other countries around the world are delivering infrastructure improvements, and yet the treasury rules and the lack of devolution in this country is happening.
All right. On that note, I think we're about almost 1 hour and 30. And so thank you so much, Martin, for joining us. Thank you to Stephen and David for your comments on buses, politics. We didn't have coffee. I mean, I actually had one, but I finished it just before we started because I thought it had to be.
Lewis
That is
Hamilton.
not coffee, Stephen. It's unhealthy. Like you have a nice, healthy,
sure.
organic, local coffee, not a monster can. That is really not.
I was
not
drinking water.
Oh, it is the best. Water is the best. It's much better than the coffee anyway. But thank you to almost 600 people watching live. Do continue with your comments. Do let us know what you want to see next. So next next one is on Friday. This Friday, Stephen, on
Yeah,
National
yeah. I
Highways.
think it's normal time if you can make it.
Yeah.
National Highways.
Normal time, our normal time, which is not very normal for the live stream, is 7:30 a.m. So on Friday, the 10th of May, and we'll be debating issues with National Highways, hearing directly from National Highways. So do send your questions so we can put the difficult questions to the National Highways representative. So have a lovely bank holiday Monday and a good rest of your Sunday evening. And thank you all for joining us.
Bye.
Bye.